Good evening, everyone. My name is Jared Hubbard, and I'm a project manager for the City of Rochester. I want to thank everyone that is taking the time to attend the first of its kind virtual open house process in Rochester tonight. We recognize that COVID-19 is causing challenges for everyone, and we understand that the impact of this virus extends beyond those who get sick. If you have non-medical questions about COVID-19, please call the City of Rochester's information hotline at 507-328-2822. 507-328-2822, where city teammates may be able to help you with some of your questions. We are fortunate to live in a community where medical expertise abounds, and we are able to lean on our friends at Mayo Clinic and the Olmsted Medical Center to do what they do best. Meanwhile, at the City of Rochester, our job is to help preserve our community lifelines as we navigate this crisis. But it's also to position our city for the future so we can come out of this stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace the new normal. Thank you for your attention and commitment to improving the community in which we all live, work, and play. And we look forward to your feedback tonight and through this process for the entire month of April. With that, I will briefly go through some descriptions of what the process will look like and what the process will look like tonight. Tonight, we are proud to announce that we have 3 webinars, not just one. And tonight we will focus in on an introduction to the project and some basic ideas and concepts that we would like to portray to you. We ask that you submit your questions in the Q&A button. More on that in a second. Responses to questions or comments will be reviewed and we'll try to answer as many at the end of the webinar as we can. You can always find out more information about the project, and we will post all questions asked as part of this webinar on the project webpage at the later this week. Like I said earlier, we are proud to announce that we have 3 webinars and not just the one. But before we get there, I got ahead of myself. Just a little quick, make sure that when you submit your questions, you make sure to press send, that you can send anonymously tonight if you like. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. Once again, we're trying to conclude the presentation at 7 o'clock tonight, so we'll see how many we can get through. And then once again, all questions asked tonight are being recorded and will be submitted on the project webpage. Like I started a second ago, we have 3 webinars. First one tonight was the introduction, and we have scheduled April 16th and Tuesday, April 21st for the next 2 webinars. Tonight, an introduction. On the 16th, we'll be reviewing the 2nd Street corridor, and on the 21st, we'll be reviewing the Broadway corridor. Again, you can find out more information about the project on the project's website, including the slides to tonight's presentation. As part of the website, we have created an interactive webpage and survey process. You can access this page on the website. For those of you familiar, it's an ArcView story map. We ask that in that interactive map, you can click on and access 2nd Street or Broadway, whatever sections you wish to participate in. And we ask that you scroll all the way to the bottom where there are additional survey questions. And again, on the project webpage, we do have a frequently asked questions. One last thing about the interactive webpage, the story map, is that we asked several questions as part of that we're interested in getting your information back about, and we asked you to make sure to scroll all the way to the bottom. And the only way to answer those questions is through that link. But tonight we will be reviewing many of those questions to get you prepared to help answer some of those questions. If you have additional information or questions for us, you can always hit us up at the Rapid Transit at rochestermm.gov, or you can give us a call and leave us a message at 507-328-2025. That's 328-2025. With that, I would like to turn over the bulk of the rest of the presentation over to Chris Hall of Skidmore, Owens & Merrill to lead us through the process. Chris?
Thank you, Jared, and thanks for that introduction. So we want to give an introduction to the study, talk about the role of transit in Rochester's future growth, and then give an introduction for the topics that this round of engagement will address. And we're really looking at 3 corridor segments.
Chris, we're breaking up badly. Adele, can you jump on in for a few minutes?
My name is Adele Hall, and I am also on the team from SRF Consulting. And so when we considered the TOD perspective in the corridor, we looked at 3 different corridor segments. The first is on the west end between Highway 52 and the Mayo West lot, and we call this segment A. The second one we call segment B. The city corridor is roughly from Highway 52 to about 6th Avenue. And then finally we have the Broadway corridor, which is roughly from 2nd Street down to about 9th Street. All right, so if you attended the first set of open houses back in February, some of this might be familiar, but just in case there are some folks who are new to this process, we wanted to give an overview of what this planning process is all about. And it is a partnership between the City of Rochester and the Destination Medical Center. And the idea is to take a look at economic development opportunity, land use change, and public realm improvement along the proposed route of the new Rochester Rapid Transit System. And again, you saw the route for that on the previous map where there were the A, B, and C's called out. So 2nd Street and South Broadway. And the idea is that the investment in the transit project is really a springboard for increased mobility, non-driving mobility, so biking, walking, taking transit, as well as a way of accommodating future growth in a dense urban pattern, allowing for those trips to be taken on transit, biking, and walking. Next one, Julie. So we talk a lot about transit-oriented development. What are we talking about? And we're talking about places, and these pictures are great examples, places that where the physical form really supports people using transit. So it's easy to step off a bus and easily walk to a destination. So places like in these images where there is good, strong pedestrian infrastructure, where streets tend to be pretty linear and kind of in a grid style. We see this, of course, in downtowns of major cities, but we also see this in some of our streetcar suburbs. We see this in small towns that were formed around railroad hubs. So they are not limited just to large cities, but really it's about density, so the number of people living and working in a given area, building heights, the form of buildings, and then all of that public space, whether it's streets, sidewalks, plazas, all kind of reinforcing a pleasant and easy experience walking, biking, using transit. So the purpose of this study is to really is founded on the City of Rochester and the Destination Medical Center's goals of facilitating Rochester's growth in a way that accommodates fewer trips by single occupancy vehicle to downtown Rochester, and really facilitates growth of downtown without growth of parking facilities and wider streets. So, and allowing that downtown land to be used for new buildings, new places to work and to live, and thus enhancing economic development, improving well-being in the city, enhancing quality of life, and of course, improving access to transit, and also to trips via bike and walking.
Hi, so I'm back via phone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your patience with my internet connection. Okay, so I think just to pick up, and thanks Adele for covering that, just to pick up, the overall goals here really are to think about how this new transit investment and future growth locations can be brought together. And in the future, really to support the dynamic nature of the downtown and dynamic future growth. It's really important to think about livable neighborhoods as well, and that's enhancing the livability of the neighborhoods that exist today and which are really an important part of the fabric of Rochester. But also think about what the future types of housing will be. And that includes for the whole range of family types and income types as well. And ultimately, one of the key goals is to shift how people move. So as the city grows, the more of the trips made to downtown are actually by transit. And once people are in Rochester, that they can actually park once and then move around the city via transit as they make their journeys between different shop locations and retail locations and destinations that they wish to go to. So next slide. I think this is just as an overview, and something we've talked about in the past, is that this is a long-term strategy and enhancing transit, and the process that's led up to this particular study has a significant background and fits within the context of some long-range plans that's been created for the Destination Medical Center, but also for the comprehensive plan as backgrounds, which then form the basis for a series of transit-specific studies, which culminated in recommendation for this alignment and this approach to transit. Where we are in the process overall, so many of you will recall that we had a consultation round in February, which included a series of open houses at lunchtime and also evening sessions, and then a series of additional meetings and also online platforms at that point. But we are in the second round where we are starting to look in more detail at what the implications for future growth will be relating to the transit proposals, rapid transit proposals for 2nd Street and Broadway Avenue. Next. And this is just some of the thinking that came out of the feedback that we received in February. People are really committed to seeing a vibrant downtown. There was a lot of interest in seeing what amenities, retail, and destinations could actually be brought forward for residents as well. So this is about something for existing residents as well as for future growth. Improving the pedestrian experience and making sure people had a really active street scene to work with. So this is an outline of kind of where we are and what the next steps will be in the process as well. So it's important that public engagement is ongoing, that there is extensive engagement in this phase, but there will also be a subsequent phase of engagement as well as the plan continues to evolve. This does lead to an implementation consideration of the final plan and an implementation plan, which will be prepared in July of this year, and then will be brought forward for council adoption. one of the key things that we're working towards is actually the application for funding relating to the transit system, which is at this point is still due in September of this year. So that's one of the key drivers of the schedule. Okay, so that's some background. We thought it'd be good to just step back. Some of this information we're going to show you, we've also shown before, but these are some of the headline reasons for this study. So if you go to the next slide. So this is a community that's projected to see significant growth in terms of population, and that's at the county level and also at the city level. And we are looking out to 2040 as we think about the types of infrastructure and the types of transit facilities we need in the future. This is a significant consideration. Next. And you can see there's a similar trajectory in terms of jobs growth. And I think that's one of the really important considerations here. The scale of employment that Rochester has and which is projected for the future is really significant. But to accommodate that growth, we do need to find ways to have people move differently. So, at the moment, there is a significant emphasis on people driving to get to work and go about their other activities during the day. And what we want to see is as the city grows and as there are more people making more journeys, a greater proportion of that actually goes to transit, and therefore the overall number of vehicle trips is held in check, and the proportion of trips that are made by individual cars reduces over time as well. And this is really about managing growth, but it's also about providing the most opportunity for people to move around in a variety of ways and maximize mobility options for residents, for employees, and for businesses. Next. So Adele, do you want to talk about the specifics of the proposal?
Absolutely. So maybe before we go any further, we're going to talk a lot about what our plan is around these Rochester Rapid Transit stations. And so it's helpful to kind of understand what we're talking about when we are talking about Rochester Rapid Transit. We are talking about a bus rapid transit line, and it is defined by several characteristics. The first is that it is a high capacity transit line. So 60-foot buses, and those are the articulated buses, we call them. They have a kind of an accordion in the middle. They accommodate about 100 to 120 riders, and they will operate every 5 minutes during peak times. And peak times are 6 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 6 p.m. on weekdays. They will operate every 10 minutes at all other times. They're also going to operate from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. on weekdays and 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. on weekends. So long span of service that those buses will be in operation. They also offer a high quality transit experience. The buses stop only at dedicated stations, and those stations have shelter, heat, light. They have real-time information about when the next buses are due. They have level or almost level boarding, which enables folks using a mobility device or people with a stroller or a cart to just roll directly onto the bus without need to deploy a ramp. The stations have what we call off-board fare collection, which means that you pay for your ticket at a station instead of on the bus. So instead of fumbling with change, it's a very smooth transaction. You can just walk right on the bus. The stations also have security cameras, phone, and those sorts of outfits. In Rochester, these BRT stations are anchored by transit villages at the Mayo West lot and also on the east end or the south end of the line, either at Grand Park or at Seneca Food Site. And these will be large park and ride sites that are surrounded by higher density residential or retail development. Here you see some rapid transit lines in peer cities. And these pictures show some of the features that I just mentioned. The articulated buses you can see in the Cleveland, Eugene, and Indianapolis photos. The level and almost level boarding you can see at all of these stations. I think Grand Rapids is a particularly easy picture to see how evenly the bus is with the station platform. You can see in most of these pictures that the stations are pretty substantial in terms of their structure and their features. And then finally on the red line, the Indianapolis Indigo example, you can kind of see behind that metal box there, that is their off-board fare collection. So that's the fare payment machine you see on the station platform itself.
Okay, so the next thing we wanted to do was focus on what the questions that we have in this round of engagement, the key topics we'll be talking about. So as we've mentioned before, there are some key corridor segments. The West Gateway, 2nd Street Southwest from the Mayo West lot to Highway 52, the City Corridor from St. Mary's to 6th, and the Broadway corridor from 4th to 10th Street is the main focus at this point, but the system does continue down to an East Transit Village. And the big questions we'll be talking about are connectivity, land uses, heights and density, and public realm. And we will be talking about these in more detail on the future webinars. We'll address each corridor segment in turn. But we wanted to talk about what some of these other factors are as an introduction at this point also. So next slide. So, and again, this is a reminder, these are the corridor segments, the West Gateway, City Corridor, and the Broadway corridor. Next. And when we talk about some of the things that are kind of key at this point, so station locations, walking and bike routes are kind of key components, and you can see here some of the elements. The land uses, jobs, retail, entertainment, but community services as well. That's what we mean by land uses. Next. And then heights and density, and this in some ways this speaks for itself. There's a range of possibilities here from 2- and 3-story townhome scales up to apartments of various scales, and hotels, offices, also residential. And when we talk about heights and density, we're really talking about the scale of future development, the number of jobs, the number of residents that will be in a given area. Next. And then in terms of public realm and open space, this is a large area, and so there are many possibilities and there are many types to consider as well. They could be smaller spaces for gathering during the day, lunch spots, smaller open spaces, trail systems that connect open spaces through city neighborhoods, the riverfront and the continued evolution of the riverfront as public space, and then whether there are opportunities for larger public spaces as well, which we hope people can use in all seasons. Next. So this is the West Gateway, and we see this in the future as an activated urban corridor. It's really a point of arrival for employees and visitors. And in the future, we'll talk about two components to this. One is around the Mayo West lot, and then one is what's currently mainly a suburban corridor along 2nd Street Southwest between 23rd Avenue and Highway 52. So two main components there. Next. And these are the sorts of materials that will be presented, and these are available online as well in a full presentation and through story maps. But we'll be talking about this kind of information in more detail. And we're not presenting all of the detail tonight. This really is an introduction, so you have a sense of the type of information that's available. So connectivity ideas, which has station locations, walking and biking routes, and how those networks of connections potentially work together in the future. Land use ideas, and this is about where mixed use activities may happen with jobs, retail, entertainment, community services joining housing. And then the scale of future development, which you can see in this case is an idea that there is more focus for heights and density around station locations and then closer to Highway 52 also. And these are some questions to think about, and there are other questions on the website and more detailed questionnaires for you to use to provide feedback. But some of the questions we would have are, do you agree that there should be more homes, stores, and jobs focused around transit stations? Does that make sense to you that transit stations can be a point of focus for multiple activities? What do you think about the station locations, which we are starting to propose now at the Mayo West lot and 19th, it's actually 19th Avenue. What other activities would you like to see at these locations? And what bike and walking improvements do you think are needed in the area to make this fully active? Next. So the next area is the city corridor. And this is an area that really stretches from the St. Mary's campus all the way into what's considered to be the edge of downtown now, around 6th Avenue. So we see this in the future as being a diverse city scale corridor. And it really is a major focus for future employment growth with some significant ideas for new infill employment in locations along 2nd Street itself. So again, there'll be a series of diagrams that talk about station locations, the walking and biking routes, the relationship to other transit routes, the relationship to the wider street system, so the connectivity framework is there. And then it will also talk about the land uses, with a concentration again of mixed uses around stations and a concentration of heights and density around those stations also. And again, these are the sorts of questions that we would be interested in hearing from you. So here, what other activities could be added to benefit existing residents as new rapid transit stations are placed around St. Mary's, 9th Avenue, and 6th Avenue? And there are significant existing neighborhoods here. So part of what we are interested in hearing is what existing residents would like to see. And as new development occurs, new activities occur, what kinds of activities would you like to see included? What kinds of public spaces are needed for residents, and how would these potentially work around stations? There is a significant open space around St. Mary's. Do you have ideas for how this could be used in the future? And then again, what additional bike and walking improvements are needed? Next. And then the next major area we're looking at is the Broadway Avenue corridor. So this is the area generally south of 4th Street and between Broadway and 3rd Avenue Southeast. So we see this as a new city district and gateway. There's significant scale of opportunity here with numerous surface parking lots and available spaces that could be redeveloped in the future. So this is an opportunity to think in the long term about some of these larger potential moves. Next. And you'll notice here that there are actually more diagrams than for the other areas, and that's reflecting the scale of the questions on the table, but also some alternatives. So there are some different ideas here about where stations could be potentially located, and from that, what the east-west connections may be in terms of new streets or new bike connections, new pedestrian connections. So there are two scenarios. One has a new bridge at 6th Street, which would allow significant new east-west connection. And the second scenario doesn't. It actually has the station around 8th Street instead of associating the station with a new connection at 6th. So in this case, there is no, in the second scenario, there is no bridge at 6th Street. It's placed at 8th. instead. And that sets up a new idea for kind of an east-west connection there. And as you look at those scenarios, compare the land uses. One has an idea of much stronger employment emphasis, and then the next is much more focused on residential throughout. So we do want to hear your thoughts about what the ideas are and the options are between having rapid transit stations at 6th Street versus 8th Street around the Sombro River Bridge, whether you see opportunities for future employment growth or whether it should lean more towards being a residential neighborhood. And there's also alternative ideas of, should the emphasis for a larger open space be along the river, or should it be a new east-west connection that connects two neighborhoods? Next. So I think, again, just to kind of reemphasize that there are multiple ways that you can get information, both through the website and tuning into future webinars. Go to the next slide. And there are various ways that you can feed back as well, whether it's online, whether it's email, or it's voicemail. And to go to the next slide, I think we're also taking some questions at this point as well, based on the information that's been shown. So Jared, do you have those some of the questions that have been coming in?
Yes, Chris, thank you. We have a few questions that have come in so far, not a lot. One question, one thing that we probably should state, since you just talked about the Broadway corridor a second ago, is that there is going to be a future planning study, really neighborhood level and community planning study of the neighborhood west or east of Broadway. And that this is a little bit of response to kind of the opening of the new Mayo lot there at the old Kmart, but we also have the Ampey facility closing down. So the city is going to lead an effort. We're currently we're soliciting for consultants at the current moment. So hopefully we'll be kicking off something, I would say summertime, maybe early fall at the latest on that. One question that maybe I should follow up with is there was a question about why our current proposal is only doing service of the rapid transit from 5 to 11, from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. The response to that is that was just our operating cost estimate at the current moment. It was seen as that we probably would have lighter volumes of people using the service over more of a 24/7 timeline. But we will continue to look at that. We still have a few years to look at that and try to figure out if that's possible. So that's still on the table, but we wanted to make sure that we could create an operating cost on some realistic ideas. Chris, I'll ask you kind of a question about, you ran through several of the slides talking about density and height. Can you take a moment to talk about maybe some of the key policies or philosophies that we will be hitting on through this project?
Yeah, I think the question of heights and density is really tied to the question of connectivity as well. So the places that we've looked at are locations that have existing transit service already through buses, and then would have significant increase in access and connectivity through this new rapid transit system. And then whether also very strong pedestrian connections in place already or planned for the future, and the same with the bicycle network as well. The idea really is the most connected places are the places where you should concentrate your growth in the future. They're the place that the most kind of different types of people can come in terms of whether they are workers, whether they're people coming for retail, and whether it's also places to live it makes sense to accommodate hotels in those locations as well.
Thank you, Chris. Have a question here about the implementation of the project. I'll take a second and interject here and say that right now, this connecting the rapid transit to the neighborhood study that we're here talking about tonight is expected to conclude July, August of 2020. The city is currently starting the process of doing a complete engineering and architectural review of the entire project. That project is now kicked off right now and will probably take the next 2 to 3 years to complete to make sure that we get all the fine details related to the project, including, just like I mentioned a second ago, hours of operation. Let's see. The question came on in here, Chris, about bicycling downtown, particularly related to City Loop. Can you maybe make a comment about how City Loop will be worked into kind of some of the concepts around our stations?
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Adele to join me in answering this as well. But I think one of the key things is that people are finding multiple ways to move around cities now, and increasingly are looking to cycling as a way to do that. And it's a way you can make short journeys. If you're in a downtown location and you just need to move between offices or between clinical settings during your workday, people are increasingly looking to those sorts of options. But also people cycle to transit stations and then are able to connect to faster journeys through the city. So the link between cycling routes and on-street cycling routes, as well as other trail systems and the transit system is really important. Adele, do you want to add anything specifically on that?
Sure. I would just add that when we were considering the station locations, we did take that into account, that possibility that there are a number of people who would like to bike to or from the stations. And so we did take a look at how well the station locations connect to existing and planned bike facilities. The City Loop routing, I think, is in transition. I'm not totally confident about that. Maybe Jarrett, you're a better one to talk about that more specifically. I'll just say one more thing about bikes at stations, which is that we often find that transit stations are popular locations for docking for shared bikes. And we also bike loops or permanent bike parking is also often a feature at transit station locations.
Thank you. Chris, I have a question here. If you could, and I'm guessing Julie is controlling the slides, maybe revert back to a map. I have a question here, someone asking for kind of to review what the areas are again.
Yeah. So do we want to go to the segment map which gives the overall view of the study area? Yeah, that's it. So this is the study area, and I guess starting from the outside, the largest geography here is really the area of influence around the transit route. So you can see that we've taken kind of a half-mile radius around 2nd Street Southwest and Broadway Avenue as well. And this is kind of an area where we expect people who live in these zones today would be able to access the rapid transit and should certainly think of it as a future asset for themselves, an amenity for themselves. And then we've identified a series of segments, which are kind of areas which are they're geographically proximate, but they also have some similarities in terms of the nature of development that exists there today, and then also what may be considered opportunity sites in the future. And I think that's worth talking about. There's more detail on the website and the information that's available there. So opportunity sites, in some cases, this is vacant land. In some cases, it's large-scale surface parking lots, which could be brought into fuller use over time and could be places for homes, for retail, for new jobs, for public open spaces, for active streets. And then there are others which there are actually existing uses today. Some of them may have their own surface lots, or components of those sites could see future infill in the future. And some of them are relatively low density and maybe older developments, and their existing owners or future owners may think between now and 2040 that those are opportunities to provide new homes or repurpose retail spaces or create new employment spaces, given the connections that are available through the transit route. And I think it's important to say that you know, those existing uses, it's really up to the existing owners whether those change in the future at this point. But yeah, this is the area that we are looking at and how it relates to the map of the city overall. You can also see on this diagram that the sites that are shaded in blue are sites that were previously identified within the DMC master plan as future growth opportunities also.
Thank you, Chris. I'll hit you with another one here. Will there be a focus on improving bike routes that connect to this corridor?
Yeah, and actually I'd encourage people to, again, look at the materials. We wish we were there with you and in a room with you, and we could go through our boards and maps and diagrams around a table. But please go to review the material that's on the website. And within that, there are a series of diagrams. The connectivity diagrams show the existing bike routes, but also show the future proposed bike routes as well. So you can see how these ideas relate to that bike infrastructure. I think, you know, one of the things that we noticed early on about Rochester is that it has does have a significant bike infrastructure, and it has a system of trails as well. So this isn't just about streets with bike routes, it's about the trail system through the parks and along the waterways and the rivers and the lakes. So there are some ideas about how these stations would connect in the future to that network of bike trails also.
Thanks, Chris. I'm gonna turn the next question over to Adele because it's asking a little. Question came on in asking a little more detail. So about the station locations on Broadway. Adele, do you want to maybe give our audience member a taste of what that conversation will look like when we talk more about Broadway on the 21st?
Sure, happy to. Maybe we could jump to the slide. Let me see, I'm trying to come up with a specific number here. It would be slide 38. Here. So you can see in these side-by-side pictures, we've got a scenario 1 and a scenario 2. And so to kind of preview it, and we get into much more detail on the Broadway Avenue webinar, which I think is April 21st, it's scheduled for, so 2 weeks from tonight. So when we looked at where stations might be sited, we looked at all the possibilities, and by that I mean every intersection along Broadway, and even some intersections that don't totally really exist today. So, you know, obviously 8th doesn't connect over to Broadway, but we were considering a number of criteria, and we were thinking about the ease of access to the station, walking and biking, and from other transit routes. We were thinking about whether the station provides access to places people want to go. So is it close to major destinations? Is it close to, you know, higher density residential, like places people work, places people live, places people shop, any sort of civic destination, whether that's a park or something like City Hall or service center of some kind. And we also considered the sort of qualitatively the streetscape and the pedestrian walking environment in the area as well. And we came away with these two scenarios because they're sort of contingent on other actions. So scenario 1 is proposed stations at 4th Street, 6th Street, and 9th Street. And 4th Street stands out because it has strong connectivity in all 4 directions from that location. It serves some pretty key destinations, the City Hall, of course, and then One Discovery Square, along with all the shops in that area. And then 6th Street is a little more of a future-looking station. It serves the future UMR campus, and then it serves the existing YMCA and, of course, the neighborhood to the west. And then possibly, if a new bridge was built to connect over the river, it could serve a redevelopment area to the east of the river. And so that's a very future-looking station possibility. The 9th Street station is one that is meant to serve, of course, the redevelopment potential along 9th Street on that Kmart site and some of the adjacent sites, but also because it's meant to be a direct connection into the Slattery Park neighborhood to the east. So 4th and 9th are really those connections from neighborhoods to the east. Then we took a look at, for scenario 2, a little different approach that is maybe even more future looking in a way, again with a station at 4th Street, but one near the river at 9th, or I mean at 8th, roughly 8th, and thinking about how you can get to either side of the river from that location, a station at that location today, and then eventually if you build a street across where 8th Street roughly would cut through, you open up that connection to Slattery Park and to all of that redevelopment area, both north and south of 8th Street. So for future residents and employees in that area. And of course, then access again to UMR and also to Soldiers Field Park. So they both have kind of some pros and cons, and you know, we're also considering the station locations from a transit operating perspective. We want the stations to be close enough together that they are serving what we would expect to be fairly dense redevelopment, but we want them to be far enough apart that we keep the bus moving, that the rapid transit continues to be rapid, because every time the bus stops at a station, it of course takes up more time. So those are some of the considerations, and those are the two scenarios we looked at on the Broadway corridor.
Adele, I'll stay with you on this one, give you a little second to breathe.
Yeah.
But essentially, we had a few comments and questions coming on in related to one station or another, or vice versa, even talking about on 2nd Street itself. What's our current status of on selecting stations, and what does the future look like on choosing those stations?
Absolutely. So let me see, how far back should we go? So I will say we, last year, the city developed a concept for, several concepts for rapid transit in Rochester, and they included 2nd Street and Broadway and 2nd Street and 3rd Avenue as combinations. We also looked at bus rapid transit and streetcar. And then the preferred alignment of bus rapid transit on 2nd Street and Broadway was chosen by the city as their preferred alternative. And in those initial concepts, station locations were put down, and they were kind of roughly categorized into really high demand stations and lower demand stations. So your high demand stations are at the 2 park and rides on the west, at the West Transit Village and the East Transit Village. And then, of course, intuitively, right, the other 2 high demand station locations are in front of St. Mary's Hospital and right downtown in front of the Gonda building. And then we had, then we essentially said that the conversation about where to put the other stations that are much more neighborhood serving, that are walk-up stations to be accessed by people who live nearby or maybe work nearby, should be one that is not just about transit operations and park and rides, but really one that is much more oriented to a study like this, which is looking much more broadly at a future vision for the city and considering economic development and connections by multiple modes, and sort of not just the existing condition, but the future vision for these various neighborhoods. And so that was the charge in this planning study, is to take a look at the station locations and make a recommendation that would be vetted and incorporated into the design of the transit project itself, which is getting underway now. And I think this study will very happily take feedback on these proposed station locations. What are the pros and the cons of each one that you see? How well do you think that they serve existing residents and existing travelers to downtown? And how well do you think they support the future of Rochester? Feedback that we get during this engagement phase in the month of April will absolutely contribute to the recommendations of the study about the station locations.
Thank you, Adele. Very thorough.
Maybe too thorough.
One question that's come on in is talking kind of about maybe the next steps a little bit, and that's really focusing on what's kind of the recommendation for 2nd Street, and how people can comment on maybe the cross section for 2nd Street. Adele, did you hear me? Adele, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't realize. Yeah, how people can comment on the cross sections of each street. Yeah, this is something that we have been starting to consider as part of the study. And I think one of the questions that Chris mentioned in his presentation is to, when you're doing the deep dives with us, either in the upcoming webinars or on the story map or the survey, we're kind of using those terms interchangeably, to consider how strong the pedestrian and bicycle accommodations are around each of the stations. And you know, I think in some areas they're very good and very strong, and in other areas there are segments missing from bike networks and from sidewalk networks. In some cases the sidewalks might be there, but they are maybe leave something to be desired in terms of their quality or in terms of how safe they feel. And so we're interested in those comments, and those will influence and inform the recommendations for the cross sections of the streets. So we're considering several options for what the streets might look like right now, and so that input would absolutely influence it.
Thanks, Adele. And we'll kind of conclude the night on this question. Once again for you, Adele. And it comes back to a conversation that we've been having a lot amongst the team and even at the city level about the number of stations and the number that were proposed that we will have that we've shown tonight and shown in online in the interactive maps and such. What are some of the thoughts going on for the number of stations?
Yeah, so I think the max number of stations I think has been 11 suggested, and I think the absolute minimum would be 8. I think we'll probably land around 9, maybe 10. There is also a concept that we've thrown around a bit on the team of what we call roughing in stations, which is a concept of essentially when you build out the line, you plan for and you accommodate a station in a given location. And I think a really great example of this is at 9th Avenue and 2nd Street, where there is currently a parking lot on the south side of the street, but the Destination Medical Center framework plans show major redevelopment in this area, and as much as 1.5 million new square feet of medical office and Mayo buildings and facilities. And so with a major development like that, it might make sense to eventually have a station location there. So you would account for that in your planning. The buses, there may not be a station there on opening day, buses wouldn't stop there on opening day, but when that development starts to go forward, it's really easy to put in the station location, connect it to the utilities, and have the buses start to stop there.
It sounds like somebody's building the station in the background, Adele.
Yes, that would be my 2.5-year-old. Even my headset cannot drown her out.
Well, thank you, Adele, for that response, and thank you, Chris, for presenting. And so I'll go ahead and conclude the night by saying thank you all for attending this evening, and refer you once again to our project website, where we have a lot more detail and information for you to look at and play with. And then I would once again want to remind you we have 2 more webinars planned to give a deeper dive and much more focused look at the transportation and the land uses around the stations, and the much more thorough conversation about the station locations coming up on April 16th and April 21st. And once again, on April 16th, that will be focused on 2nd Street, all of 2nd Street, while on the 21st, we'll focus in on Broadway. And once again, I will say this, that all presentations will be recorded, including this one, and be posted to the same webpage for all to view, and so that you can pass along information and ask your friends and other family to look at these as well, and help provide additional feedback. Once again, I'll just want to say this. Thank you, and you can always reach us at Rapid Transit at rochestermm.gov. And finally, at the phone number 507-328-2025. With that, I thank you very much, and I appreciate all of your attention and time for the night, and particularly on a warm night like it is. Thank you all, and have a good night.